welcome to Zend Out IGTV. My name is Erin, I'm here from Team Zend Out, and I wanted to share a bit about spellwork and witchcraft ethics with you today. So if you want to read the full blog post that I wrote, you can go to zendout.com/blog or click the link in our bio. But yeah, I think this is a really important topic and an important conversation for us to have, because when we understand that witchcraft is powerful, that spellwork is powerful and has real life, real world implications, that working with energy isn't just theoretical, it's physical too, we know that we need to be responsible and ethical in our practice. We know that there is potential for causing harm, just like there is for healing. And so I don't believe that ethics in this area or in any area really are black and white. There's something right or wrong, something I can prescribe to you from this video or in this post. I think ethics are really nuanced. I think they're really personal, and I think we all have to decide what they are for ourselves. So I'm not sharing in this video here's what you should do or shouldn't do. I'm just offering some things and some questions for you to reflect on, to kind of figure out what are your own values, what are your ethics when it comes to witchcraft and spellcraft. So I just want to share a couple of different areas of reflection for you to connect with. And that first area of reflection is cultural appropriation and consumption. So I want to share a definition of cultural appropriation, and I'm going to read it here from Ijoma Aluhu, author of So You Want to Talk About Race. She wrote for Medium, cultural appropriation is the misuse of a group's art and culture by someone with the power to redefine that art and in the process divorce it from the people who originally created it. So I just want to offer up that definition of cultural appropriation for us to think about. And cultural appropriation is rampant in spirituality and New Age and witchcraft communities. It's everywhere. It's sacred indigenous plants being bought and sold by white folks. It's indigenous knowledge being whitewashed, repackaged, and sold. It is practices being stolen from cultures of color. And so you can probably hear in what I'm sharing here, obviously I'm coming from my perspective as a white person sharing this with you. So if that's not your identity, then perhaps some of the things that I'm sharing will not be as resonant for you. But I think it's definitely true that the impacts of cultural appropriation are not just personal. They function widely to continue to funnel power towards white people and away from Black folks, indigenous folks, and people of color, which is really important to acknowledge. So again, so much of this, it's not just about us when it comes to ethics. It's not just about us. What we do has implication and has impact, and it matters. I also personally feel that working with tools and practices from our own ancestry is always going to be more powerful than working with tools and practices that are not from our own ancestry. So some reflection questions for your own practice around cultural appropriation that you might like to journal on, reflect on, meditate on, sit with, feel into. What tools are you using in your magical practice, and where do they come from? If they're from cultures other than your own, how are you giving back? How are you uplifting and supporting those cultures and those people? This is less cultural, well, it's a little cultural appropriation, but more on the consumption side. But are these tools that you use sourced in ways that feel good to you and aligned with your values? So for example, are your crystals mined by children? Are trees being chopped down for your Palo Santo? Asking these kinds of questions. And it's this is very justice card. It's we need to connect with the truth, see truth, know truth, so that we can decide, right? How are we going to take action? How are we going to live? What are we okay with? What are we not okay with? But really looking and seeing, even if, it might be hard to think about, oh, I really have no idea where my crystals come from. It's totally possible that they're coming from child labor. But I think we really need to think about those things, and it's a privilege not to, honestly. So a couple other questions. What are the lineages of the practices that you use? If you don't know, do some research. How were your ancestors practicing witchcraft and magic? What are their traditions? What tools were they using? What were their beliefs? And I know that these are huge questions and they're really important ones, especially for white folks like myself to be asking. I think it can be hard to find this kind of information, and speaking specifically for my own ancestry, when much of European folk magic traditions were stolen by Christianity when that empire swept over the continent, but it is out there. So I have a couple recommendations to start ancestral research. I recommend checking out Sanyu Estelle's Ancestral Altars Europa Edition recorded class at Sanyu Estelle, I believe is their Instagram, as well as Megan McGuire's work. And I know that Cassie also loves Ellen Santier's work on British shamanism, so those could be some places of exploration for you, some diving in points when it comes to ancestral work, understanding your own traditions. A couple of other areas that I'm not going to touch on here, but I get into in the blog, are justice and consent. And the other one that I wanted to talk about here is causing harm with magic. So just like we can do spell work to attract love, attract abundance, to heal, all these things, we can also practice curses, hexes, other kinds of spell work to manipulate and cause harm to others. So it would be really easy for me to tell you here, like, never use curses or hexes, never practice magic that causes harm. There are Wiccan creeds around this that you might be familiar with, or you might have heard of in passing, like the Threefold Law, the Wiccan Rede. I don't practice Wicca specifically. I'm definitely witchcraft outside of a tradition like Wicca, but I will share what these laws state, and they have certainly informed my practice. So the Threefold Law states that whatever energy you put out will come back to you ×3. Pretty powerful. And the Wiccan Rede states, and it harm none, do what ye will. So there are different ways to interpret the Wiccan Rede, and you can definitely Google if you want to get some more in-depth interpretations of it, but most people agree that it means as long as your workings harm no one, do what you feel called to do in alignment with your highest self, most rooted self, however you want to think of that. I tend to agree with those ideas personally, but it's really not so black and white, right? So some black magical traditions like hoodoo have no such rules and use cursing and crossing in alignment with their own ethics, and I think it's important for me and for all of us to stay in our own lane when it comes to passing blanket statements around what is and isn't okay to do with magic, when there are deeply rooted traditions that incorporate some of these practices. And we can expand this out too, and this is really, this is ethics, right? Can be a whole discussion, like, is it truly unethical to curse or hex a person who does evil in the world at a large scale? Is it truly unethical to curse or hex a person or use magic to make someone stop doing something who is causing harm? I don't have answers for you, obviously, but I invite you to reflect on these questions, like what settles in your body and heart when it comes to causing harm with magic. Again, how did your ancestors feel about this? Like, what is your lineage? What is your lineage's practice around this? So I really think that at the end of the day, we all have to be able to sleep at night from a place of knowing the truth, not from, ignorance to the impact of our actions. So asking yourself, and I'm asking myself too, like, what do you need to change or lean into in your practice to make that so? And I talk more about some other areas of reflection for ethics in witchcraft in the blog post, specifically around consent and around justice. So definitely check that out if you want to hear more about that, get some other things to reflect on. And yeah, we would love to hear in the comments your thoughts about these topics, what ethics in witchcraft and spell work means to you.